We had this really intense period of time installing the exhibition, which, I mean, for me, certainly as a curator, is always the absolute highlight of what I do. These objects, this work arrives from your studio, other museums, lenders, collectors all over the world. You unpack it and the narrative starts spilling out. And it's a really precious time in terms of the conversations that we had, the conversations about the work, and reconfiguring the narratives that we wanted the exhibition to tell. And then the headlines and the news and this wave of the virus was something we became increasingly aware of, although, to be honest, we were, I think, like so many people, just still in a bubble. And we had the exhibition opening with some trepidation as to whether it was sensible to have a crowd or not. And I remember this phenomenal energy at the opening, which was partly because of the celebration that it was, but this sense of edge or uncertainty that we were coming together perhaps for the last time in a long time. But it was a really powerful moment. And then this kind of crash to absolute isolation and rules that were sweeping across the world, Europe, the social distancing, and we had to close the exhibition. It was the antithesis of everything that we'd been building up to. So it'd be great to hear about your experiences of that, maybe of making the exhibition and being in Leeds, but what happened over the next week or so as you left England, when you went back to your home and felt this tidal wave coming.
I agree. It was a very intense time, and we were in a bubble of installing. And I think, as I also came from a very stressful time with other projects, I was really so focused on installing and like getting this done, and then I really couldn't cope with the facts that happened around us with the news. And in that night, when we had the opening the night before, then the US announced that they are going to close the borders, and I already had like a single flash, like, oh my God, my next project that I'm going to have in America, that was already on a boat crossing the ocean, couldn't take place as I can't go and it couldn't be done. So it was only like a small idea that, wait a minute, but I put it on pause because we had an opening. So, and I think all these facts and news didn't really approach me until I came back to Germany, still like with all this happiness in my genes of having a successful show, and felt relief. And suddenly I went into a shop and it was completely empty, and the saleswoman was crying. My kids they had their first day without school, and I was completely falling into a different world. And I had a deeply shock as I felt like coming from the moon back to Earth, and something, there were no dinosaurs, there were suddenly, I don't know, other animals going around. So a deep shock, I have to say. And I become sick. So, and of course, as everybody thought in that moment, that's definitely the virus. So I got really sick. I had strong dreams, and then you came with this news that the show is going to close. and it felt really like a loud bang, like a loud door that is closed, and I felt left alone with my work in your space, totally alone, and it came like a nightmare. It's a nightmare started like because all my work suddenly had no visitors, and I was the only visitor in my brain because I still had this fresh feeling of all these installation dialogues we had. And so I had some strong moments with my works by myself.
The bronze Bumpman figure, which we installed in front of the Institute, there's another iteration of him inside the exhibition, a smaller carved wooden figure, but the bronze figure stands outside the Institute now kind of as a sentinel. I can't help but feel about him being this active and very dynamic character, sort of protecting and being this kind of broker to your work that is in a closed building but is still there having a relationship with an audience. And he's a figure that's shifted a lot. We had the pleasure of seeing people interact with him for a week, maybe before everything closed. And I remember how much children especially were kind of dragging their parents up to him. It was quite a tactile thing. There were people taking selfies, hugging him, but there were lots of families there. Now, even that is sort of unthinkable. People aren't touching things. People aren't in groups. They're in isolation, just as he is. But I was interested to just get your sense of your feelings about the transition of meaning of this figure, going from this sort of tactile, familiar thing. I sent you an image of him becoming a site of protest, having a face mask put on him, which is on now. But what's it like having a figure of yours that's sort of a stand-in for you, for the exhibition, but also absolutely for this current pandemic?
I was deeply touched when we decided to put him outside. I think we both haven't been thinking any second about anything that's happening right now. And that now he starts suddenly to become a sign or a symbol in this time wasn't our goal, but now he is. And he has so many layers. The way he expressed himself, I mean, not himself, he is not a living, the expression of him is very touching, so you want to hug him, and he's like he has this glimpse of hope in himself, which I think it's great outside. He's not looking like a suffering creature full of bumps that he's having a disease. He's something in between. There is a red line through art history, and things are constantly coming back in circles. So if I would tell you where the ingredients for these works are coming from, it's a long path, and it goes on. There's a very private part, and it's like if you write a song, you have all this stuff coming together that brings out the song. And of course, if you don't want to give up, you don't want to tell the recipe in details, but of course, if I would be on your side as an art curator or coming from art history, you can see there is this image from Grunewald, the Isenheim altar, but it doesn't mean like I'm seeing that image and I'm doing that work. So my work doesn't function like that. And I think art doesn't function like that you just change the costume. But then there's also like a big archive in my brain of these images I saw from a book. It's called Wundergestalt. but there is also Wundergeburt. I don't know how could you explain it in English, but it's a miracle birth as well, and it's from 16th century. And these were like these public pamphlets people were getting on streets, and there were these very simplified images of characters. And so I was watching them, and they were fantastic. And they were like signs of God, dealing with diseases and the plague and stuff like that. So I found it extremely inspiring seeing these images. And so I felt like this is repetition. I was rereading The Plague from Camus. And it's so touching to read this book, because it feels like you can just change the word plug into coronavirus, and then you're in the same story.
I think there's so much that's really interesting about that notion of the cycle, and there's something that's actually really comforting about that right now, that things do repeat, and that wherever you are in the cycle, you get out of it. Maybe less so that you always come back to it, but I'm thinking about those emblems and icons throughout art history. There is something really reassuring, but also crossing over into religious iconography, and the sense of Bumpman as an icon and where he exists in a timeless sense feels very significant. There's a comfort at looking at imagery that you know has survived war, plague, disaster, famine, and I guess it gives us a window out of this situation, which I'm sure is why Bumpman has become so important. I'm also reminded a bit by your notice board behind you, but of the first wall in this exhibition that now no one can see for a while is of your drawings. And your drawing always seems to have this very intricate interweaving of history, the present day, childhood, adulthood, imagination, but going back to historical figures, even as a sort of gentle reference with Cranach, with Rembrandt, are very present. And I'm conscious that you said that drawing is something you've returned to during this period of lockdown. So it'd be great to hear, I guess, what drawing means to you, what it has allowed you to do in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think drawings is a relief for me when I'm doing it. And this time right now feels like we are on pause. Someone put the pause button, and also on my schedule there is a pause button, and it feels like suddenly I'm surrounded by silence, and I can hear the silence again, and it feels great. When my kids are not around, if they are here, it's the opposite of silence. I totally reconnected to that time when I was just right after academy, spending a year in the middle of nowhere. I had a residency, and I really was isolated. There was no phone, there was no internet. I had a big fighting dog, made my walks and made my drawings, and it felt great. It was challenging, but I could see there is an ocean in myself full of images, and they just bubble out. And so suddenly in these weeks here, I'm reconnected to this ocean. It's a stupid image maybe, but it shows how it feels. It's like everything that falls in from seeing, because I still can see. I mean, I see everything very intensely, and it falls in me, and then it comes out in drawings, and it's a mix of what I see in books. I see people, I see animals, I have dreams, so it just comes out very naturally. A lot of topics have been seen in my imagination before. I think I was kind of reconnecting to my inner world. And there were these animals, of course, my dear friend, the dog, and crazy stuff comes out of heads, which is more like a transformation thing. So it's this hybridity, which is always part of my work. Because everything is so loud around me, I'm very easily disturbed. It's like training to get reconnected to these images.
Do you mean a block because you haven't drawn for so long?
I've did drawings, of course. I think it's more my problem that I'm difficult to closing the doors by myself, because you could say, where's the problem? Just close the doors. But if someone else closes the doors and says like, there's nothing outside right now, it's like, I don't know, it feels like a tiger that now has to stay, you know?
I guess what absolutely characterizes your work is this this balance and interplay between a real conceptual charge, but also very traditional means of making. Mm-hmm. And one of those is disappearing. I mean, this is a really traditional craft, and you went to a specialist school to learn it. Mm-hmm. Those schools are dying out. What does that mean to you, that this skill might disappear?
It's really sad. I mean, if this knowledge about all these techniques will disappear, it's so quick. I mean, it's a little lifetime from my life comparing to the tradition of wood carving. It's horrible to see that this is ending up. So maybe we have a chance going through this horrible time where we are now in, to rethink of what we want, where we come from, what we should focus on, and things like that should really have a different value. And
I'm interested to hear about your experience at art school as a carver and someone who had trained very traditionally. You studied at the academy in Dusseldorf, and I imagine at that time your convictions were probably at odds with fellow students and especially the tutors that I know of at that time. What was it like, sort of sticking firmly to your material in that environment?
When they heard that I come from this wood carving school, they immediately told me to stop doing that. They even said that I should forget everything what I've learned there. It has nothing to do with art. So I was really totally confused for many years, and started doing this and that. At the end, I was extremely involved in politics of the art academy, so I was more like a rebellion to fight for like a class without a teacher. So because everybody wanted to study with the famous artists that were never there, so we wanted to have a free classroom. At the end, I left Tony Craig, ended up with Gerhard Merz, and there I wasn't allowed to do my work in that space. So we were only reading and talking about artists. So I had a little studio outside the academy, and I was really so confused that I restarted carving at the end of my period of the academy, like having this dream of doing a little figure that you just can have a knife and a piece of wood, and you can just do your work wherever you are. You don't need a big space. So if you really know what to say, you just need a white paper and a pen, and then you just write a great poetry or whatever, make a small sketch, or just have a piece of wood and make a really precise piece. So I restarted it, and then it was actually that work that we have in the show that was my last work that I did in academy. It's the deer standing. So I showed it in the academy, and everybody who came really loved it. So it was maybe at the end, from saying it from this perspective I'm now, I can say it's definitely good to be shaken up and confused for some time.
The fact that you always make your work yourself directly, you're the carver, you're not sending it to a fabricator. Is that an important way of connecting everything for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you would be like a spider watching me while I spend my day carving, you would laugh. Because it's a performance around the subject, which is the sculpture and me. And it's like dancing around. But I have to focus and concentrate on carving. It's a different process than modeling in clay. Carving is very demanding, full speed. Everything is focused. But I can't do this because it's very tiring also. So it's like between listening to music, what kind of music, bringing you into this mode, plus body feelings that needs to stretch or run away. So I'm like dancing around the household, the music, the carving to get focused and listen. Sometimes I'm also listening to audiobook. It's the flow of the day that is important. So I could never have like an idea and give it to a place, a wood workshop that they should work on that. Modeling is also different, working in clay, because there the physical impact of the fingers going into the material is a very sexual part, I would say, in that sense, because you're touching a material with your fingers, and you have to put it you have to, I don't know, put energy into your delicate and physical things. It's like stroking the material, I would say. It sounds stupid, but it feels like that. It's like stroking the object until it comes to that quality of where you want to have it. Maybe I come back to that moment when you closed the museum and I had this kind of really strange conversation with my own work, being my own visitor in that show. I realized that where all this comes from is something where I'm really connected to isolation. It's a normal, familiar feeling. It goes down into early childhood memories that I was very familiar with these feelings, how I grew up, how my family house was set up, and how my relationship to my situation was theirs, and it wasn't an easy task. So it was a very special growing up, and for a child, I would say a high burden on a young kid on her shoulders.
So everything comes back to, or this red line that still connects the now to the then. Do you want to say something about the contents of that pot? Is that important for us to know?
The pot has ingredients of a father that has a very, very intense life history to tell, and he was a storyteller, but not like a fancy storyteller from, I don't know, stories that haven't been taken place. His life was a very heavy story, I don't know, and it affected our family life tremendously. So, say it in small sentence, he was very old when he was becoming a father. And very old is maybe the wrong word, because I'm approaching in that direction and still feel young. But for a father in that time, he was in his early 60s. So it's challenging having kids in that period of your life. Other story was that he was Jewish, Hungarian. He went very young to Paris, 1924, to study art. He couldn't make a living out of it, so he became also a caricaturist for a very famous magazine called Le Monde. And he was on that blacklist when the Nazis came to France, and he had to escape to the south of France. So that's where he could survive, at the Côte d'Azur, and that's where he met a lot of famous artists from that period and become very close friend to Jean Cocteau. And also Picasso's wife was very close. That's why my name is Paloma. But then he also could make his living there as an artist, and in this very lively time in the Côte d'Azur of all these artists. And of course, you could also say, why didn't he never made the way up to America, where a lot of Jews went? So he met my mom then in the late 50s, and she was much younger, 21 years younger, I guess. Yeah. And she got pregnant, and her parents were upset, and so he had to come to Germany, and that was like the end of his starting career. So he then got 3 kids in total and was telling us all these stories of the past. It wasn't easy because for 7 years until I got to school, I was more or less alone with him. So, and then he was in his mid-60s already and had this little girl around him that was alone. So it was like locked down for 7 years. So I was absolutely in a lockdown for 7 years. Things that you see now in your gallery are definitely coming from that part. So ingredients from still life are, my mom was a chemistry, all these glass objects from her laboratory were part of my daily business to see all this. So it's a memory what I did when I was a child, lying under a glass table playing the Snow White fairy tale. So I don't know, it's kind of different stories behind. The facade is a copy of our garden house, and you can hear all these voices coming through, which were tapes that we did when we were kids with our father, who was always giving us an interview with him, or we had to talk about what we would be when we were grown up. So this is kind of like a cacophony from all these tapes, but I can easily open the box and look into it and get some stuff out of it. So you can say, can't you close this box and say that's the past? And of course I'm a grown-up person, but it's like, maybe that's the goal of an artist, that he or she has this link to something where she can always go back.
One of the earliest works in the exhibition, Ville de Lutte, which is 1998, which is really a work about connections and families and relationships. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and how it came about and when.
Mm-hmm. So it was actually my first exhibition in a gallery space in Düsseldorf, 1998. It was done more in that spirit of doing sketches. And I was more triggered through a title of a series of painting of Lucas Cranach. And he painted like a family scenario in the forest. And it was always like Adam and Eve kids and a lion lying around. Some have this kind of strange fawn-shaped ears. So it looked something like surreal and very like the center of men, women, family thing, but in like a universe of innocence. And I think this was definitely like the step I went into that field. And of course, as in all my works, private stuff is interfering in my imagination. So it was all about this. What is it being alone, being a couple, having kids, might have kids? In that period of my life, there was these questions. So I made all these little scenarios of getting together of kids, and funny wise, I found it very sweet and interesting when we put it together, and I gave you like this opportunity to do the setup of these groups. Suddenly you made like a lonely child or just a single parent. And I think when I did the whole thing, I've never thought about that topic and that possibility. So I think there were all kind of matches that you can play around with this group. So it you have to see it more like sketches.
But I'm interested in using the word sketch-like, and this is a work that's made in clay rather than wood.
Mm-hmm.
And you kept it in clay, so it had that sort of transient malleability, or?
Definitely. I think it, if you ask me about different connection to different material, I think I have this range of different energies, levels, and working with clay is always very direct and very, I don't know, you can always re-put your mistakes. I mean, like a redone, I don't know, if the nose is too big, you make it shorter or whatever. So you have a very direct way of interfering with this material. In case of wood, it's a much more physical work, and it demands extremely concentration and focus, and it's I don't know, it's this power, but also like a restrain energy, which is a different approach. And drawing is just like, you can give me a call and I make you a while I do drawings, so I can be in my brain somewhere else while I do drawings. And mostly it's even better when there are different things coming together when I do drawings. So I think that's part of the love I have to all these different materials. Mm-hmm. While installation is more like a film set or a theater play. It's really more about storytelling in a bigger perspective, because then you have to have a plan. Then it's more like a journey for weeks, might change, things coming in, things changed. So it's there are just like different qualities and different dimensions.
So Waldfrau's the last work in the exhibition.
It was developed in a year. I had an artist in residency in the north of Germany. It was called Bremerhaven, which is like the end of the world of Germany. It's at the border of where all these big ships go to America, like the container ship port is, and it's next to Hamburg. So it's really for up north. And I had this year also very isolated over there, which was extremely inspiring through this being by myself. And next to Bremerhaven, there is an area called Worpswede. That's the part where in the 30s, a group of artists were very important for that time for the art world in Germany. And one character was Otto Modersohn, and he was a big fan of Paula Modersohn. I mean, she became Paula Modersohn. there was this love, hidden love. And so he made a painting telling this hidden love in this painting, making this Waldfrau sitting in the forest with all these dwarfs sitting on a knee, and all these dwarfs were like his colleagues who also were in love with her. So it was like a big fight around these women. I don't know, I fall in love with this painting and this story, and then this scenario with this kind of ghost-like woman sitting in a white dress in this forest with these strange little creatures around, but they were not like a bumpman, they were like really like small, ugly men. I just was inspired by this painting and this narrative. And so I created this ghost-like figure sitting on that tree trunk. And because I thought how to organize a tree trunk in a gallery was kind of like a unrealistic dream. So the way how you cut trees before you make planks out of it is the way you see it now in your gallery. Mm-hmm. So that's how you dry a tree. And I think it's an incredible way of a sculpture already, how it's then shaped in this, with these sticks between. I already had like an installation format, and then the bumpman who already existed in another work was then this kind of like a small figure sitting on her knees. So the whole thing is, of course, a scene.
Well, I should say it's been really nice talking to you in this slightly unusual manner, and I really appreciate your time and thoughts. And we are eventually going to reopen the exhibition on the 1st of September. And as of course you know, we've extended it until January, the 3rd of January, 2021. Mm-hmm.